Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity of studying your word and for considering your acts in the past, things that you've done to save your people. We ask that you bless us now and send your Spirit to guide our thoughts. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. We're in Exodus 7, and last time we saw the preliminary sign that Moses and Aaron gave to Pharaoh. Remember that as a sign to the Hebrews, Moses' staff was turned into a serpent. And Moses grabbed it by the tail, and the staff became a staff once again. As a sign to Pharaoh, Aaron threw his staff down, and it became a crocodile. And we'll start there again in Exodus 7, verse 8, where we were leaving off last week, and just quickly review. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, it's important when Aaron is mentioned with Moses because it indicates something. Back in chapter 7, verse 1, God says, see, I make you, Moses, as God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. So we have kind of a hierarchy of power here. God, and then Moses, and then Aaron. And Aaron is going to be in conflict with the magicians who represent Pharaoh. And Moses is going to be in conflict with Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt. And the Lord himself is going to be above it all. So here it says in verse 8, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, which indicates that we're going to have a conflict with Pharaoh and with Pharaoh's spokesman, the magician. When Pharaoh speaks to you saying, work a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff. So Aaron's staff is now coming into prominence. And throughout this narrative, all the way down into the book of Numbers, there are two staffs. Moses' staff. When they get out into the wilderness, they don't have any water. Moses is supposed to strike the rock with his staff. Later on, when they don't have water, he's to take Aaron's rod and speak to the rock, holding Aaron's rod in his hand. These distinctions are important. Aaron's rod is the rod of the subordinate here. And so when Aaron's staff is taken, we know that we're in conflict not directly with Pharaoh, but with his magicians, with his spokesman. Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh that it may become a crocodile or a dragon. So Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh, and thus they did just as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron threw his staff down before Pharaoh and his servants. Emphasis on the servants. Moses and Aaron, Pharaoh and his servants. And it became a crocodile, not a snake. Then Pharaoh also called for the wise men and the sorcerers, and they also, the magicians of Egypt, did the same with their secret arts. So now we got Aaron, his rod turns into a dragon. The magicians, their rods turn into dragons, through means that we have no way of understanding. It's demonic probably. Each one threw down his staff, and they turned into serpents, dragons. See, the translation here is not helpful. They've translated two completely different words with the same. This is not serpent, it's dragon, or crocodile. Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. So now, the victory of Aaron over the magicians is what we find here. As a sign to Pharaoh that God has power over him. But we're starting at this lower level. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. So now we come to the 10 plagues, and now we come to today's lesson here, which we will isolate the first 9 plagues and talk about them for a few weeks, because the first 9 plagues are arranged in a very careful and particular order, and then the 10th plague comes as a climax to the set. And so we're going to consider the first 9 plagues as a unit. That's Exodus 7:14 to 10:29. And there are 3 preliminary things that we need to talk about. The first is the concept of the Avenger of Blood. The first plague that we're going to have here is that the Nile is going to turn to blood. And blood spilled out on the land calls up the Avenger of Blood. And we've mentioned this before, and now we're going to talk about it a little bit more. The Nile turning to blood calls up the Avenger of Blood. Who is God? Jehovah is the Avenger of Blood. In Hebrew, the word kinsman redeemer and kinsman avenger is the same word. It's the word goel. G-O-apostrophe-E-L. You can leave off the apostrophe and just call it a goel. That means both Redeemer and Avenger. Actually, what it means is nearest of kin. And the nearest of kin has both of these jobs. If you become so poor that you have to sell yourself into slavery in order to pay off your debts, your nearest of kin should come and buy your freedom. If somebody kills you and murders you, your nearest of kin has the responsibility to track him down and avenge your blood. That's his duty. It's not something that he can let down at his own discretion. He must do it. If he has the money, he must buy you out of bondage. If he's able, he must destroy the one who has oppressed you. He must defend you. Of course, Jesus does both of these things. Jesus saves the elect and destroys the wicked. He avenges the church against those who attack her. And you see this in the New Testament. In the New Testament, the first thing that Jesus is presented as is the Redeemer. He redeems the church. In the book of Acts, you see the church being redeemed. You also see the church being attacked. When you get down to the book of Revelation, you see Christ presented as the Avenger who delivers his church by destroying Jerusalem, by destroying their enemies. Jesus does both of these things. Now, the turning of the Nile to blood then is going to call up the Avenger, and he's going to come at the last and kill all the firstborn sons of Egypt. And everything else is a preliminary warning to that. Now, why does he kill the sons of Egypt? Because the first time the Nile was turned to blood was when the sons of Israel were thrown into it 80 years before. So this turning the Nile to blood means that what happened 80 years earlier, when the boy babies of the Hebrews were thrown into the river, and the river ran red with their blood, so to speak, now God is saying, this has now become visible to me. It's now before the court. 80 years have gone by, and I have allowed Egypt time to repent. I have held off on judgment. But now the matter is before me. Now when I look down, I see a red river, and I have to act. The crime was committed back then. Now it's before the court. The river turns red with blood. Now God must act as the Avenger of Blood. The first time this comes up in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 4. Let me call your attention back to that, where Cain murders Abel. And God comes to Cain, and he says in verse 10, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." So the ground has an important role to play in calling up the Avenger of Blood. The land is defiled by blood. The land calls up the Avenger. The major passage on this is Numbers 35. I'm going to read to you a little bit on this so that we have a good picture of what the Avenger is. Numbers 35 will start in verse 9. So turn there if you would, and let's get a preliminary picture at least of how the Avenger of Blood worked in the Old Testament. This is, of course, later on, after they've been delivered from Egypt, and that God gives the law of how they're to operate in the land, but it shows the principle. "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them," this is Numbers 35, verse 10, "When you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall select for yourselves cities to be your cities of refuge, that the manslayer who has killed any person unintentionally may flee there. And the cities shall be to you as a refuge from the avenger, so that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation for trial. And the cities that you are to give shall be your 6 cities of refuge. You shall give 3 cities across the Jordan, and 3 cities in the land of Canaan. They are to be cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall be for refuge for the sons of Israel, and for the alien, and for the sojourner among them, that anyone who kills a person unintentionally may flee there. But if he struck him down with an iron object so that he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. And if he struck him down with a stone in his hand by which he may die, and as a result he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. Or if he struck him with a wooden object in his hand by which he may die, and as a result he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. The blood avenger himself shall put the murderer to death. He shall put him to death when he meets him. And if he pushed him with hatred, or threw something at him lying in wait, and as a result he died, or if he struck him down with his hand in enmity, and as a result he died, the one who struck him shall surely be put to death. He is a murderer. The blood avenger shall put the murderer to death when he meets him. But if he pushed him suddenly without enmity, or threw something at him without lying in wait, or with any deadly object of stone without seeing it dropped on him so that he died while he was not his enemy nor seeking his injury, then the congregation shall judge between the slayer and the blood avenger, according to these ordinances. And the congregation shall deliver the manslayer from the hand of the blood avenger, and the congregation shall restore him to his city of refuge to which he fled, and he shall live in it until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil. But if the manslayer shall at any time go beyond the border of his city of refuge to which he may flee, and the blood avenger finds him outside the border of his city of refuge, and the blood avenger kills the manslayer, he shall not be guilty of blood, because he should have remained in his city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer shall return to the land of his possession. Now, what does this say? It says that in the land of Israel, if you kill someone accidentally, his nearest of kin was required to try to track you down and put you to death. He does that because the land is defiled and the land calls him up. He doesn't do it just because he's your next of kin. That accounts for why he's the one and not somebody else. But the obligation doesn't lie on him to carry on a clan feud. This has nothing to do with family vengeance. It's not family law. He's not going to kill you because you violated his family. He's got to kill you because you have defiled the land, and the entire nation is going to stand under judgment if this isn't taken care of. So he is required. He may be your best friend. He may know you didn't mean to do it. He is still required to track you down and force you to go into the city of refuge. Now, in the city of refuge, this doesn't apply. Once you're in the city of refuge, which is run by the Levites, then a trial is set up. The Avenger of Blood becomes the prosecuting attorney. The Levites become the defense attorney. In our law, we have defense and prosecuting attorney, and the concept is here in the Old Testament. They didn't just have judgment by judges sitting together and deciding it. They had prosecution and defense. And in this case, they had it. Now, there's a decision that's going to be made. Evidence is going to be presented. Maybe you really did murder the guy. Maybe all the evidence shows that you're a murderer. And if that's the case, you'll be kicked out of the city of refuge, and the blood avenger will be responsible to put you to death, which means he will cast the first stone. If it turns out that you were only guilty of accidental manslaughter and you didn't intend to kill the guy, then they let you go back into the city of refuge and you stay there. If you ever go outside of it, the blood avenger is required to track you down. So he hears that you've left the city of refuge. Well, he's got to drop what he's doing. He's got to track you down and try to kill you again. Otherwise, God will be angry at the whole nation, and the land will curse. Remember what it says about Cain. The land will curse you, and you won't be able to settle down. Now, the whole nation stands under that curse as long as blood is not covered. And so the blood avenger, he's got this duty. The duty is to take care of this situation and keep you in the city of refuge. And you stay there until the high priest dies. Now, what does the death of the high priest do? It atones for that bloodshed. Points to Jesus Christ and his death. And when the high priest dies, you can leave the city of refuge and go back into the land, and it's all over. Then after that, if that blood avenger is carrying some type of grudge, and he kills you, he's a murderer. He'll be put to death. But until the death of the high priest, which may be 5 years away or 50 years away, you've got to stay in the city of refuge and take up another trade. Now that's because blood spilled on the land calls up the Avenger of Blood. And it's his duty, for the sake of the nation, to take care of this problem. Look over at Deuteronomy 21. Shows us how dangerous it is for there to be bloodshed without it being atoned for. Deuteronomy 21, starting in verse 1, if a slain person is found lying in the open country in the land of the Lord your God gives you to possess, and it's not known who struck him, then your elders and your judges shall go out and measure the distance to the cities that are around the slain one. And it shall be that the city that's nearest to the slain man, that is, the elders of that city, shall take a heifer of the herd which has not been worked and which has not pulled a yoke. And the elders of the city shall bring the heifer down to a valley with running water that's not been plowed or sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. Then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near, for the name of the Lord your God has chosen them to serve him and to bless in the name of the Lord. And every dispute and every assault shall be settled by them. And all the elders of the city that's nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley, and they shall answer and say, Our hands have not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it. In other words, we don't know who did it. We can't judge. Our eyes cannot judge the situation. Forgive thy people Israel, whom thou hast redeemed, O Lord, and do not place the guilt of innocent blood in the midst of thy people Israel. And the blood guiltiness shall be forgiven them. So you shall remove the guilt of innocent blood from your midst when you do what's right in the eyes of the Lord. Now notice what that says. We don't even know who killed this guy. And yet, the land has been defiled, and the entire land may come under a curse. And so you've got to go out there and make atonement for it. In this case, you kill a heifer, which ties into a whole bunch of other things in the law concerning the red heifer, which is over in Numbers. That cleanses the land. You see, in the Old Testament, it's real important. If this murder has taken place and nothing's done about it, then under the way God set up the world, the ground will call forth vengeance, and the ground will harden up, and it will not yield its fruitfulness to you, and the entire nation's under judgment. So the avenger must do this. It's not an option. And it's not some type of family clan feud thing here. It's not you attack my family so I get you back. No, it's that God is angry at the land, and so the judgment must be taken care of. Now this becomes an important theme in the Old Testament, because at numerous times we'll find that people wait for the death of the high priest for things to happen. For instance, in the book of Numbers, when the people are wandering in the wilderness and they can't go into the promised land, what changes everything is the death of Aaron. When Aaron the high priest dies, immediately they can go into the promised land. In the book of Joshua, we find that the people settle the land, they live everywhere in the land. The very last verse of the book of Joshua says that the high priest died, which means everybody who had gone to a city of refuge got to go free, so that at the end of the book of Joshua, everybody is settled in their land. So these are important things that happen, these deaths of the high priest, and if you track that down in the Old Testament, you find that significant changes take place. Well, in the story of Exodus that we're about to read, where are the cities of refuge? The Avenger of Blood has been called up, and he's called the Angel of Death, and he's going to stalk through the land, killing all the sons. Eye for eye and tooth for tooth, child for child. The Egyptians killed the Hebrew boy babies. Now the Egyptian boy babies are going to be killed. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, blow for blow, child for child. So where are the cities of refuge? Where can you go to hide from this avenger? That's right, you make your little house, your individual house becomes a city of refuge. Every house that has the blood of the Passover lamb on it is a city of refuge. That's where the city of refuge starts, the Passover house. So, that's where the city of refuge is going to be. Anybody who flees under the blood, will be protected. And Israel later on, these Levitical cities maintained by the Levites, they are a holding place until the blood of the high priest, until he dies and his death becomes the atonement and lets you go free. In the case of the Passover, the death of the lamb, you get to hide in the house, and the next day you get to go free, because the blood provides a sanctuary, and then you get to go free. In the case of the cities of refuge in the land, you hole up in there until the high priest dies, and his death means you can go free. And once Jesus dies, the entire world is cleansed. And so this system doesn't operate in the New Testament anymore. The land no longer calls up an avenger of blood. Instead, what we have is the civil magistrate is designated to be a perpetual minister of vengeance, according to Romans 13. And he's supposed to check into these things and take care of them. But the symbolic structure where the land calls stuff up, and if you find a dead body, you've got to kill an animal to atone for it, that's all gone. But in the Old Testament, that's how it operated. Now, that's important to understand the way the plagues operate. That's why I spent some time on it. Because all this blood is displayed before God, and the land cries out for the avenger, and the avenger comes. He comes with a whole bunch of preliminary judgments, and then finally he comes as the angel of death. That's how they tie together. The second thing we need to talk about here are the cycles of the plagues. And you actually have 3 more pages after this one that lay out the 3 cycles. Well, let me give you some preliminary thoughts about this. We'll look at them in detail as we go. The Bible presents us with a three-decker universe. Just the common sense world consists of three layers. What are they? What's the Second Commandment say? Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that's square. Heaven above, or the earth beneath, or the waters. Waters are under the earth, so here are the waters, and here's the earth, and here's the sky. So waters are under the earth. Doesn't mean they're underneath the ground. It means that they're below the level of the ground. So you have this common sense triple-decker universe. These plagues are laid out this way. There are 3 cycles of 3 plagues each. So the first plague in each cycle has to do with water. The first one is that the Nile turns to blood. The fourth plague, the first one in the second cycle, is swarms of insects, which come up while Pharaoh is standing by the water. Insects are associated with the water there. And the third is hail, water from heaven turning into hail. That's the first of the third cycle. So the water plagues are plagues 1, 4, and 7. And the first in each cycle attacks water. Something connected with water becomes a plague. The second plague in each cycle attacks the earth. We'll look at this in a little bit more detail as we actually read the text. But let me just lay it out now. The second plague, which is the second one in the first cycle, is frogs. He says, I will smite your land with frogs. Then the fifth plague is the plague on livestock, land animals. And the eighth plague is the locusts that devastate the land. So now we've got water plague, a land plague, a water plague, a land plague, a water plague, a land plague, and the third in each cycle is a plague against the atmosphere, against the heavens. The third plague is the plague of gnats, swarming gnats that bite people. The sixth plague is the plague of soot. Moses takes soot, throws it into the air, and it becomes boils on the people. And the ninth plague is the plague of darkness that might be felt. So these 3 plagues are plagues against the atmosphere. So we get water, earth, sky, water, earth, sky, water, earth, sky, and then the firstborn are killed. That's the order of them. So what does that tell you that God is, what does that indicate about these plagues? What do they mean? If God is attacking the earth, the water, and the heaven, and destroying it, then what's he destroying? The whole world. The judgment is against the entire world, the entire cosmic order of Egypt. The whole world is being destroyed, and a new world is being made. And remember, the Second Commandment says, you are not to make idols out of any of these things, and that's what the Egyptians had done. They made idols out of everything, as we'll see in just a moment. But what emerges from these cycles, and we'll look at the cycles another way in a minute, but that God is acting against the earth, the heavens, and the waters of Egypt, the entire cosmos of Egypt. And by extension of the world, the first world, the Adamic world, all of that is being decreated so that God can make a new creation in righteousness, with the new Adams, in a new garden, that he will plant in the land of Canaan. This old world will be destroyed. The new world will come into being. Out of the ashes of this, they spoil all this and carry it to the new world and make a new world. Of course, they mess it up, but that's not the thing we're looking at here. The old world is destroyed, the new world is made. And that's what they can pick up from that. Now, another thing that we'll see as we go is that the first 3 plagues, plagues 1, 2, and 3, Aaron does them, and they're just minor annoyances, and they include the land of Goshen. The second 3 plagues, Moses does them. They're much more serious judgments. They don't completely destroy the land, but they're considerably worse. The last 3 plagues God does, and they destroy the land of Egypt. So that's another way in which these things progress, as we'll see as we go along. Now remember I just said, now this is the next thing in your notes, is that the Egyptians had made gods of all of this stuff. In the Second Commandment, it says you're not to make gods of anything that's in the heaven above the earth, beneath of the waters under the earth. So in attacking these things, the Lord is attacking the gods of Egypt. They had divinized the world, so God attacks the world. And the text explicitly says that these judgments are against the gods of Egypt. For instance, in Exodus 12, verse 12, God says, I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. Now that verse indicates that the people themselves were the gods. But beyond that, it implies that all the plagues were against the gods of Egypt as they were. Exodus 18, verse 11. Exodus 18:11, Jethro says, Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people. So the plagues reveal that God is greater than the gods. And finally, another verse is Numbers 33, verse 4. Numbers 33, verse 4 says, While the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn, whom the Lord had struck down among them, the Lord had also executed judgments on their gods. The Lord had also executed judgments on their gods. So, these plagues are against the gods and against the magicians. Now, I mentioned that Aaron corresponds to the magicians and Moses corresponds to the gods. Aaron is the prophet, the magicians are Pharaoh's prophets, the prophets of the false gods. Aaron's crocodile ate up the magician's crocodile. And in the first cycle of plagues, we will find that Aaron's staff is used, and at the climax of the first cycle, the first three, it says that the magicians were defeated. So the magicians were defeated when their crocodile got eaten up, and they're also defeated in chapter 8, verse 18, where in connection with the third plague, the magicians tried with their secret arts to bring forth gnats, but they could not. So they were defeated. Now the magicians are able to turn water to blood, and they're able to bring up frogs, but they're not able to bring up gnats. And so at this point, at the end of the first cycle, which is Aaron's cycle, the magicians are defeated. Cycles 2 and 3 bring to focus Moses against God and against all the gods. Now Moses is present at all of these, but Aaron acts in the first three. In the second cycle, Moses speaks to Pharaoh. The first cycle, Aaron's rod is used to bring the plagues. In the second cycle, plagues 4, 5, and 6, Moses tells Pharaoh what's going to happen. In the third cycle, it says Moses uses the staff of God to bring about the plagues. So Yahweh himself acts more prominently in the third cycle. And so we move, you see, from a war against the magicians to Moses fighting against Pharaoh, finally God fighting against the entire system. And at every point the victory belongs with God and his people. Now the Egyptians made gods of everything, and we'll look in somewhat detail as much as we can as we go. They had a frog god, they had the Nile River as a god. The predominant gods, of course, were the Nile and the sun and the Pharaoh. So the first plague is against the Nile. The ninth plague is against the sun, turns it dark, puts it out. And the 10th plague is against the people themselves, Pharaoh's household. But we'll look at these as we go. Any questions over these preliminary remarks? We can look at the first plague today. We'll start anyway. Look at the next page in your notes and we'll look at the first cycle. The first three plagues. Plague number 1 is the Nile turned to blood. Plague number 2 is the frogs defile the land. Plague number 3 is dust becomes swarming gnats or lice in the air. In this cycle, Aaron's rod is used. Aaron is Moses' prophet. His judgments are mild and priestly in character in that they warn the people They're not particularly severe. It's a real pain to have frogs all over everywhere, but it doesn't really devastate you. It's no fun to be swatting gnats that are constantly biting you, but it's not the same as having all your livestock killed or all your crops destroyed. So these are warning signs. The second thing we notice about these three plagues is that Goshen is included. The Hebrews experienced these as well. They can't get any good water out of the Nile either. They get bit up by flies too, which indicates that all men are subject to the judgment for sin. And not until God elects to set a difference between the two is there any difference. And that happens at the beginning of the fourth plague, at the beginning of the second cycle. God says, I set apart the land of Goshen. I elect these people. And because I'm going to take away their sins, they're not going to experience any more judgments. In a sense, what that means is all the tribulations that we as Christians experience in this life, they're just gnats and frogs. Bad as they are, they're just gnats and frogs. Even if they torture you for 5 years and finally crucify you, it's still just gnats and frogs compared to this other stuff that the wicked are going to get. The other 7 plagues that are so horrible, they don't fall on God's people. The distresses that we experience in this life, great as they seem to us, are by comparison only these minor things. At least I see that as an implication. The third thing we see is that these are primarily signs, miraculous warning signs. The comfort of the people is attacked. Now, in the second set, property is attacked. In the third set, Egypt is completely destroyed. But here it's just an attack on people's comfort and well-being and how they feel. Warnings. In these first 3 plagues, judgments come from human spokesmen, and so they come up from the ground, not down from heaven. Remember, man is made of the earth. Man is made of the ground. And so the judgments come up from the ground. The rivers turn to blood, frogs come up on the land, dust is taken out of the ground and becomes swarming things in the atmosphere. So although the plague is against the waters, the earth, and the atmosphere, they originate in the ground because they're brought up by men. Now later on, in the third set, the plagues shower down from heaven. Hailstorm comes down from heaven. Locusts come in on the wind, and the sky is turned black. The sun is put out. You see, you move from plagues coming up out of the ground to plagues showering down from heaven. Quite a difference of emphasis. And those are brought by God's staff itself. The climax of this first set is that the magicians are defeated. The climax of the second set is going to be that the magicians are driven out from Pharaoh's presence. You'll see that on your next page. So, that's what's going to happen in this first cycle. Now, the first plague is the Nile turns to blood. That's in chapter 7, verse 14 to 24. The word Nile occurs 14 times in this section, which is twice 7. Significant literary device. Let me show you a little bit more about how Moses has written this, how God spoke it. Chapter 7, verses 14 and following. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hard, strong. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning. Now that is the way each of the cycles begins. Plague number 1, plague number 4, and plague number 7 start. Go to Pharaoh in the morning. Chapter 8, verse 20. This is the fourth plague, the beginning of the second cycle. Now the Lord said to Moses, Rise early in the morning and present yourself before Pharaoh. Chapter 9, verse 13, which is the beginning of the third cycle. Then the Lord said to Moses, Rise early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh. So each of the cycles begins, plagues 1, 4, and 7, rise up early in the morning and go to Pharaoh. So it says, Go to Pharaoh in the morning, as he is going out to the water. This is back in chapter 7, verse 15. And station yourself to meet him on the bank of the Nile, and you will take in your hand the staff that was turned into a serpent. Now that's not Aaron's rod, that's Moses' rod. This is the snake rod, not the crocodile rod. The snake staff, not the crocodile staff. This is Moses' rod. And you will say to him, Yahweh, The God of the Hebrews sent me to you, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But behold, you've not listened until now. Thus says Yahweh, By this you will know that I am the Lord. I am Jehovah, Yahweh. Behold, I will strike the water that is in the Nile with the staff that's in my hand, and it will be turned to blood. Now this is Moses' staff will strike the Nile, and it will be turned to blood. Moses' staff is said to be in God's hand. It's God's staff. But Moses is just holding on to it here. Moses would use the staff of God to smite the Nile. Verse 18 says, The fish that are in the Nile will die, the Nile will stink, and the Egyptians will weary themselves in drinking water from the Nile. They won't be able to, really. Then the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron. Now this say to Aaron occurs in each of the first 3 plagues. Aaron is emphasized. The Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron. If you want cross-references, you will find it also in 8 verse 5 and 8 verse 16. Say to Aaron, make frogs. Say to Aaron, make gnats. Chapter 8 verse 5, chapter 8 verse 16. Or 3 say to Aaron's that identify the first 3 plagues as Aaronic. So verse 19 of chapter 7 again. Then the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Take your staff. This is the other staff now. This is the crocodile staff. And stretch out your hand with the staff in it over the waters of Egypt, over the rivers, over the streams, over the pools, over all the reservoirs of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. So Moses and Aaron, both of them, did even as the Lord had commanded. And he, Moses, lifted up the staff and struck the water that was in the Nile in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of all his servants. And all the water that was in the Nile was turned to blood. And the fish that were in the Nile died, and the Nile stank. So the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. And Aaron took up his staff and waved it over everything, and blood was throughout all the land of Egypt. Doesn't say that Aaron did it, but that's what Aaron was told to do. So, Moses initiates the whole cycle with his staff, but then Aaron comes into play and fills out the plague. And then Aaron will do the next 2, because these are the Aaronic Plagues. Now, this is said to be so that Pharaoh will know. Verse 17, By this you will know that I am the Lord. If you want a cross-reference, make sure you note down chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, where Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? Well, now he's going to know. The plagues will answer that question. Moses initiates the plagues by striking the Nile. Then Aaron carries out what Moses starts and stretches out his staff over all the waters. Notice that there's an emphasis on the bad smell in verses 18 to 21. Why is that mentioned? It's mentioned, I think, because chapter 5, verse 21. Chapter 5, verse 21, when the foreman came to complain to Pharaoh about straw and bricks, and Pharaoh sent them out, they met Moses. Verse 21 of chapter 5, they said to Moses, May the Lord look upon you and judge you, for you've made us stink in Pharaoh's sight, in the sight of his servants. So, the persecution and murder of God's people stinks. And they stink to Pharaoh, and now God makes that more visible by making the whole land stink. It stinks everywhere. I'll tell you what, rotting blood stinks. And it's everywhere. Now notice what happens here. This is just really great. I mean, this is one of the funny things in the Bible, and the Bible's full of funny things. See if you get the humor. Chapter 7, verse 22 says, But the magicians of Egypt did the same with their secret arts. What does that mean they did? They made even more water into blood. That's really great. We had some water left over, and now you've made it into blood. It doesn't say that they turned the blood back into water. No, they just made it worse. Kind of stupid, isn't it? And they do this again. The next plague is the plague of frogs. And after the frogs come up, chapter 8, verse 7 says the magicians did the same with their secret arts, making frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So all the magicians can do is make things worse by adding to it. So it says, verse 22, the magicians of Egypt did the same with their secret arts, adding to the plague. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had prophesied. Then Pharaoh turned and went into his house with no concern even for this. So verse 24, this is real significant now. So all the Egyptians dug around the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the Nile. And 7 days passed before the Lord had struck the Nile. So, let's get the picture here. The Nile was turned to blood. They said, oh, gee, we can't get any of this water now. It's all turned to blood. So they went home, and they got the water that they'd gotten the day before, and it had turned to blood. So there was no water anywhere. So where did they get water? They had to dig around the Nile to get it. The contrast here is between old water and new water. The old water is all bad. The old water has turned to blood. And if you're going to drink, you've got to go get new water. And that's what's pictured here. The old is gone. The new is what you need. And that's the transition from the old to the new. Now we can see this by comparing Jesus' first miracle, which was what? Turning water into wine. And what was the point there? The old wine had given out, and the new wine that Jesus gave was even better than the old wine. It was that expensive California stuff. So it was higher quality. The contrast between the old and the new points to the fact that the covenant is changing. The old is going out, and if you're going to be saved, you've got to get into the new. See, in the case of Jesus, it was okay for the Jews to be Jews until Jesus came along. And when Jesus came along, the old covenant worship was not acceptable anymore. The old wine gave out. And they were either going to starve and die, or else start drinking the new wine and become Christians. Because God wasn't going to tolerate any more animal sacrifices. In the case of Egypt, it's the same kind of thing. God had overlooked their sins for 80 years. But now, He's not going to overlook it anymore. The water turns to blood. And they're either going to starve or start drinking the new water. Well, they don't really. But they have to go get new water. The contrast between the old water, which is defiled, and the new water, which is a sign to them of something else. If the old is given out, there is a new. There is new water. God Himself will give. In the wilderness, God gives water. God is the one who gives water. So that begins to be pointed to here. It's a theme that starts coming in here, like a thread. Is this real blood? That's a debate. Seems to be. Jesus turned the water into real wine, or just into purple water. I think we'd say it was real wine. And so we'd have to say this is real blood. As one commentator says, it looked like blood, smelled like blood, tasted like blood, rotted like blood, felt like blood, and so was taken to be blood. If somebody wants to fight about whether it was really human blood or animal blood or something else, we don't know. But for all intents and purposes, it was blood. It wasn't just red water. It wasn't red tide. It wasn't bugs in the water that made it red or anything like that. There's no natural way to explain this because, remember, you have conservative commentators who try to have a natural explanation for stuff like this. They say, well, there was a lot of red silt in the Nile. Well, that doesn't explain how it is that when they got home, the water that was in their jars was turned to blood too. See, this is a miracle, so let's just have it as a miracle and not worry about it. Two last things, and we're done with this one. Verse 19. It says at the end of that verse, there will be blood throughout all the land of Egypt in vessels of wood and vessels of stone. Now, that means that their pots at home, their water turned to blood. But it also implies something else. The word vessel, or it's not even there in the text, both on wood and on stone. See, their idols were made of wood and stone, and they washed their idols every day. Which means that if they washed their idols, they had to wash them with blood, which is a judgment against all the gods of Egypt. Because blood means death. So that's another point that's there. A judgment against all the gods of Egypt is implied there. And finally, we notice the last verse of the chapter. It says that this lasted for 7 days. And what that means is, the theology of the Old Testament is that the first week is defiled. Man's first week is destroyed. God made man on the 6th day. He started on the 7th, and He ruined it. And the whole first week of human life is destroyed. God starts a new week on the 8th day. When we get into the ceremonial laws in Exodus, we'll see this a bit more. Circumcision is done on the 8th day. Jesus was resurrected on the 8th day, starting a new week, because the first week is bad. And so the idea that you have bloody water for 7 days is a judgment against the whole first week of man and points to a need for a new week to start on the 8th day. And that's another theme that will come up several times in Exodus again and runs through the whole Bible. The first week is defiled. The new week starts on the 8th day. We better close in prayer now. Father in heaven, we thank you that you are our defender and that you avenge us when we are attacked. We can see from this passage that sometimes you wait a very long time to vindicate your people, but we know that eventually you do so. We ask that you'd help us to have our faith in you and not to despair as we see all the rotten things that are done to Christians in this land and other places in the world, and to look forward to the day when you will stand up once again for us in our country and deliver us from the hands of oppressors and restore your church. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.